Hello, everyone. I'm Marty Meredith. I work for Silver Creek Leather Company, and we manufacture the leather for some of Michael's private brand. We're happy to introduce this new craft to Michael's, and now I will turn it over to Annie, and I will try to answer any questions that you have. If you want to put them in your chat box, I will ask Annie as we go along um, if we have some questions about the project.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's really cool that I can actually see some of you. I've been doing a lot of online classes in the last year and a half, but usually I can't see anybody. So it feels much more like we're actually together doing this. My name is Annie Libertini, and I'm so glad that you've taken the time to join me for this project. We're going to be making a leather poinsettia ornament. Although if you don't like ornaments, you could also stick a pin on it or make it into something else. But just, with the holidays coming, I thought an ornament would be nice. So for a lot of people who are into crafts, you might not have thought about working with leather before. It's kind of one of those mediums that can seem a little intimidating or not accessible. Or maybe you just don't know what you'd want to make out of it. Like you don't want to make a belt or a wallet. I was one of those people too. I went to art school for painting, and I would take up any craft that I could get. Take me to Michael's or craft store, and I would want to learn everything. But I never thought about working with leather until I was given some tools by chance, and it completely opened up my world artistically. So, it's always worth trying. You never know what might be your new favorite thing. So this is an example of exactly what I'm going to be making. And I'm going to switch just now to my overhead camera so we can actually start working on it. 1 second. Let me swing it over real quick so you can't see how many things I have piled on my table. All right. So here is the pattern, and hopefully it didn't cut off any of it when you printed it. I worked pretty hard to try to get it to fit into the print space, but that can happen. You'll see that there's 3 different pieces, but one of them does say to cut out 2. So that's this medium-sized one. And the leather that we're using today is this leather piece you can get at Michael's. It's ArtMinds brand. And it is an 8.5 by 11 piece. If you're not familiar with leather, this is what is called vegetable tanned leather. And I'm someone who specializes in sculpting leather as opposed to doing more flat sort of stamped things. And vegetable tanned leather is the only kind of leather that you can really sculpt with. So if you are interested in this kind of work, that is what you want to look for. It's what belts are usually made of. Any kind of leather that's stamped or tooled will be vegetable tanned because it's the only kind that can. And it's tanned using, traditionally, I think it's oak tannins, which is why it's called vegetable tanned, because they use plant material. It's the least processed of leather, and you'll notice it's on the stiff side. This particular piece is, it's kind of medium thickness. If you ever buy leather, you'll see that it is rated its thickness by ounces, which can seem a little weird at first. This is 4 to 5 ounce, but it just kind of corresponds with a certain thickness. This is a good one because it's thin enough to do a fairly small, delicate thing like this, but it's also thick enough that if you wanted to do something like a mask or a larger piece or something, or even a wallet or something, it is thick enough to do that. So it's a really good sort of mid thickness. You're probably wondering, if you haven't used leather before, how exactly this is going to sculpt because it probably feels pretty stiff and immobile. But you will see how easy it is in just a minute. So when I drew out this pattern, the size of it, I worked really hard to make sure you could get all 4 pieces out of this 8.5 by 11 piece. So I hope that was not particularly difficult for you. Because when I did it, I've got some pre-cut out ones, but if you line them up right, you should be able to get all 4 out of this. Now I have pre-cut out 3 of my pieces, just because we do have a lot of steps to get through in a fairly short time. So I'm trying not to spend too much time forcing you to watch me do things that maybe you could just as easily do yourself, without necessarily needing my my step-by-step information. But I did want to note real quick that cutting it out, usually what I will do is trace the pieces on from the back side. I cut out my pieces out of paper so that I could trace them. I used a ballpoint pen. And when I say front or back side, with leather, the technical terms are flesh side for the back. That's the rough kind of sandpapery side, and grain side for the front. But I think I'm just going to say back and front for this. So if I say the front side, that means the smoother side, that's what's going to show. But I generally like to trace on the back, because then if, my pen slips or something, it's not going to show. So you can use an X-Acto or even a beefier kind of utility knife to cut this leather. It is fairly difficult to cut, but if you've ever cut any, really stiff mat board or cardstock, you'll probably recognize it kind of similarly difficult. But what I find helps is to make sure that, like, when you start your cut, and I usually like to start sort of in the middle so that I'm cutting toward the outside of the design, just in case, I might lose control of my knife. If you cut and try to make sure that your blade gets all the way through at the beginning of your cut, so you can feel it biting into your cutting board, and then just draw the knife or cutting mat, draw the knife real smoothly out. And I find that makes it a little bit easier. But if you are someone who you're just finding that too difficult, or maybe your hand strength isn't really up to it, it also absolutely works to cut more lightly along that line and then just go back and, sort of do it in maybe 2 or 3 cuts. The only kind of reason that is not always ideal is that you really do need to make sure that your cut the second time or the subsequent times really line up with your first cut. Otherwise, it's going to end up a little bit ratty. So that's kind of the main reason that it can be better if possible, to go through in one cut. You could also use scissors. This thickness of leather is, it's possible to cut it with scissors. You'll need pretty sturdy ones, like shears. I don't tend to do that myself, just because in the end, I find that to be harder on my hands than cutting it with a blade. But everyone works very differently. So whichever way works for you, I think, is the way to go. If you're not accustomed to cutting things this stiff and hard, definitely start slowly, because the last thing you want is to accidentally lose control of your blade. You'll notice I'm obviously left-handed. I don't know how many of you are, but I don't think there's really no tools or anything else I'm using in this project that should be used differently or confusing to anyone because of my left-handedness. So I'm glad for that, because occasionally it does come up. And any of you who are left-handed, I'm sure, understands that difficulty. So once you have your 4 pieces cut out, you're going to want to get either like a small towel or a little pad, kind of folded up paper towels or something, because the next step is to spray. I hope you enjoy my towel. It's a cat with sneakers. I've had it since I was a kid. But it's to spray this leather down with some water. I'm using a real fine misting spray bottle. I like it because it makes it a lot easier to get moisture on the leather without getting it too wet by accident. And if it does get too wet, it absolutely, you can just wait for it to dry or use a hair dryer. But, it's nicer if you can just get it perfectly the first time. And the misting bottles kind of go on a little more evenly. So I'm going to start spraying. Right now I have these turned so that the top layer, the smooth side, is facing up. So it is the front side that I want to spray right now. And I'm just going to do them all at the same time. You'll see it darkens pretty noticeably when you spray it, which can help, especially if you're a beginner with this kind of leather. It can really help you to kind of gauge the moisture level of the leather. If you ever talk to a leather worker, you'll hear the term casing, which is what is usually it's called when you're essentially dampening the leather in order to, usually it's to stamp it or tool it. But in this case, it is to, make some marks on it and then mold it. And the term casing tends to mean sort of getting that perfect moisture content. So I've basically gone over and sprayed these twice. So it still feels dry on the back, but they do feel a little cool, slightly damp on the front. You do want to give them a second to absorb that water, and that will kind of happen as I sort of scoop this out of the way momentarily. You'll notice as they start to dry, and depending on your humidity or your weather, it could take a lot less or more time, even just the leather itself, because it's a natural material, and even the very consistent pieces that you might get, like the ones you can buy at Michael's, they're still natural, so they're all going to be a little bit different. And usually it will start to lighten up slightly, especially around the edges, and that's when you know that you're kind of at a good point for the next step, which is to draw these lines on here. What I'm using is a stylus tool. This is a ArtMinds brand. Here's what it looks like in the packaging. And you can find this at Michael's in the leather tool section. If you don't have one of these, another kind of a stylus with this tiny little ball end, I know there's ones that are used for ceramics, even like fondant. So there's other ones you might find in other sections. And as long as it's got a good sturdy metal end, it will work just fine. I like this tool because it's also got this modeling spoon end, which can be really handy. The reason I wet this leather, just the front side, is because in order to get a good line on here that's going to really get into the leather and stay, I need to have it damp. That kind of, it softens it, it makes it malleable, it makes it ready to accept marks. And this is the same thing you'd do if you were tooling or stamping. So I'm going to hand draw these lines on. I've done a lot of these, so I don't need to trace them. Because it's a flower, it's sort of a natural thing, and I personally think a bit of randomness, a bit of inconsistency can be actually a really positive thing in your final piece. It can make it look a lot more natural. So if you feel like you might want to just eyeball these lines, I would encourage you to do so. And don't stress too much if they're not perfectly centered, not perfectly spaced. A flower wouldn't be either. And once it's done, those little things aren't really going to show. If you want to trace them, what I would suggest is to put some like packing tape on the back of your pieces. It's sort of home laminating, just because the dampness of the leather can weaken the paper up. But if you're just tracing one set of these, your paper is probably fine. It may start to tear at some point, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. What I usually do, I'll start with the biggest guy, is kind of start in the center. It's a little hard to see, but I just made a little mark there because that's can be my starting point. And with my stylus, I'm just going to real lightly draw the line from that center point to the end. These petals are not, they're not designed to be perfectly symmetrical. You can probably see that if you look at the pattern pieces, because that is not how they are on the plant. They are not really perfectly symmetrical in their shape. So try to get it pretty centered. It's sort of the center vein line of like a leaf, but don't worry too much if it doesn't look perfect, because the sides of the piece itself are not perfectly the same. So it cannot, it's really fine. I know a lot of crafters are, we're detailed oriented people by nature. So it's sometimes hard to find that perfect place between a little too detailed and detailed enough. But for this, it's really, think about, they're basically leaves. So we want to make this texture on them. Once I've done these lines lightly, I'm going to go back and do them with a lot more pressure. Don't be afraid to press pretty hard. If you're pressing so hard that it feels like it's sort of tearing at the leather or bringing up any little bumps or anything, maybe let up a little bit. But for the most part, don't be afraid to put some pressure on there. We want to get these marks in pretty deep. The reason that I did a lighter one first is just that when you are exerting more pressure, it's a little easier to accidentally sort of lose your control and have it sort of go off to the side or off a little example, or sort of off your line, so that you're kind of lost that. It's a little easier, I think, if you have a lighter line on there, both to follow visually and to actually kind of help your stylus stay on track. So now that I've done this, I want to go back and do these other little lines. They basically, I'm probably going to call them petals a few times in this, but they're basically on a poinsettia, they're all leaves. It's just some of them are red and some of them are green. So these are sort of the vein lines on leaves. Again, don't worry about them being perfect. You do not need to measure the exact distance between every one of these. Doesn't need to be identical. The main thing is to get this kind of downward curve and to make sure that the lines are starting at the same place. So a lot of times what I will do is do one side and maybe even go around the whole way, just because you sort of get into and I'm just going hard with my stylus now. With these shorter lines, you don't necessarily need to sketch them on first more lightly, although you absolutely can if that makes it work better for you. For me, the center line is kind of the only one I really need to do that on. And again, don't be afraid to exert some pressure. You want to get these lines in. So you can see how well those have gone in there. They're very visible. So then you can go back and just do the other side, because now that you have your one side, you can just start at these points and do the rest. Generally, at last, I will also just go one more time through this middle, just to make sure it didn't get kind of, I don't know, smushed up a little bit while I was doing these other lines. I know it probably looks like I'm sort of rushing through this, and I kind of am because there's a lot to get done, but also it's a texture. We're not drawing a picture, and this is a part of this project that it's easy to maybe get a little bit too focused on the little details and spend way too much time making every line perfectly spaced, which is, if that makes you happy, absolutely do it. But sorry, camera. But for the most part, it's not going to make that much of a difference in your final piece, because it's going to be 3D. These lines are their texture. So they're not going to be the main thing your eye is focusing on when it's finished. So, if you want to make them just completely perfect, then do so. But I would also say if you're someone who tends to maybe get stuck on certain steps, a little overly detailed, try to get yourself to move along so that you're not too, you don't get too stuck on this one. So I'm going to switch to the smallest one now, and you just do the same thing. For this one, you may not need to sketch in the center line first, more lightly. It just depends. I kind of like doing it just to make sure I'm in the right place, because that's sort of the longest line, and it would be the most obvious if I went real off kilter. And if you lose control of your stylus on any of these lines, that's where this end comes in real handy. Or if you don't have this tool, anything that has a smooth, hard, rounded end, it's like an eraser. You can sort of try to smooth off your mistake. It may not completely erase it. This is going to sound horrifying, but nothing really erases any mark in leather. Once it's there, it's really already there. But you can still work with it. You can still really minimize if you make a mistake on it. That's the other reason that I started on the largest piece. It's going to be the farthest to the back of the flower, and therefore the least visible. Only the ends really show. So, if you're kind of getting used to how this all feels and how it moves and how everything goes, it's a good place to start, because in case there are any issues, they probably won't show. But you would be surprised at how much you can smooth out with the right tool. So I'm going to do these little ones. And of course, you need to do basically this exact same thing with all 4 of your pieces. I am not going to have you watch me do that, because we don't have time. We wouldn't be able to do all the other pieces we need to do. But they are basically all the same. It's just the slightly different sizes. So once you've got your lines on there, as you're doing this, if your leather if you just feel like it's not doing it right, it's not looking like mine is, this is a place where you really are getting a feel for this perfect level of moisture in the leather, which is a big part of this kind of leather work, is sort of achieving that. If the lines, when you're doing the lines with the stylus, if you're getting a sheen of moisture coming out, then it's too wet. You want to leave it, let it sit for a bit. If you're getting, if it just doesn't seem to want to draw the lines at all, and it's too firm, it's probably too dry. It's one of those things that you really just start to learn by feel. So once you have gotten, we'll just pretend I have all of them, but once you have gotten all of them lined, you're gonna get your towel back out, and I'm doing this. Mine have dried out a fair amount. There's only a tiny bit of moisture in them now, so I'm gonna give them a really light as I can, spray on the front side where my lines are. I'm going to turn them over and give them a pretty good spray on the back side. This is another place where I'm trying not to over wet them, because I don't have time to wait for them to dry a little bit. If you're not in a hurry, it's not as big an issue. And if you don't have a spray bottle, you could even submerge these in water and soak them. The only thing with that is that if you're in a time crunch, that will it takes a little while for that to come back up to the moisture level you need, because we need the moisture to be really all the way to the core of the leather. So at this point, I've probably sprayed them like 3 times, I guess, but it's pretty light layers. And what I want to feel for, especially in the smaller one, it's actually easier to feel, is I want to feel that it bends easily. See how easy that is? Curls, it bends, but that it's not floppy. It's got kind of a good balance between being malleable, but it also kind of keeps the shape you put it in. It's not just like floppy and wet. So that's another place where it really is feel. And you'll get there. It can be a bit frustrating at first, but that feels pretty good to me. So we will just pretend I did all of them again. I appreciate you going along with me on that illusion. So the last thing you want to do before the really fun part, which is shaping these, is you can use the side of your stylus, you can use the modeling spoon side, you could use, I could even use like the edge of my pen. It just has to be something smooth. And I want to run it along the edges. It's probably really hard to see on camera because it's kind of a subtle difference, but there's a sharp edge right here where it's cut. And I want mine to not look like it's a piece cut out of leather. I want it to look a little more natural. So just running this along, you don't have to press especially hard, but just running it along there just softens that hard cut edge a bit. And even if you just do it kind of quickly, it does, I think, really make a difference in your final piece. It's a really, you know, with leather as with many other mediums, it's a very, it's all about the little details. So you'll want to do that with all of your pieces. But we'll just continue the illusion that I did it with this one. The nice thing about poinsettias is that all of the pieces are basically the same. So I'm going to show you the shaping on this large one because it's going to be the easiest to see. But you're doing the same thing with all of them. So first you want to make sure, is it damp enough? Is it good? It's not floppy and wet, but it feels like it's doing what I want. So
Annie?
Yes?
Someone's asking the question, is she burnishing or question mark?
I was kind of burnishing the edges. What I'm doing is very similar to that, but I'm focused more on this actual sharp cut corner, as opposed to necessarily trying to really smooth out the side, I guess, because that's what burnishing the edges would be, to really smooth this side, this cut side. And if you want to spend the time to burnish it, that would look very nice too. But I was really more focused on just softening that cut corner. So the answer is kind of. Yes. But it's a
That
good
works.
question.
That works.
Yeah. So if you want to start with this big guy, it's probably the easiest one just because it's the largest. So have it facing you, and with each of the petals, focus on your line and kind of bend it in, sort of like closing a book, along that line. Do not worry if the edges don't match up. Like I said before, I didn't design these to be perfectly symmetrical. So just wherever your line is, go with that. So, and just bend it and gently pinch it, and it should stay pretty well like that. And I tend to sort of go around with each step, for all the petals, and kind of assembly line it, as opposed to doing beginning to end on each petal. That's just a personal preference. So then it'll look like this, which is kind of funny looking. But now we need to spread out and kind of curve the edges of the petals, or the leaves. I'm just going to call them petals. So what I like to do is I'm holding my hands like this. I've got my pointer fingers kind of curved in. I will place them behind here and basically just gently supporting this bend so that I don't accidentally flatten it out. And then with my thumbs, I can start to curve the edges, and I'm actually using my fingers to kind of curve them over, because I don't want to pinch it. I don't want like another crease. I want a nice curve. And this is also the same way that I make leaves and a lot of other things that are in this shape. You can see it kind of went like that. And once I've got the curve, I've started to get it in there, I can go back in with my fingers. You can even sort of run your finger along the edge to just curl that very edge under just a bit. And if you look at a poinsettia, their leaves, their petals are much flatter than this. A lot of this is going to flatten out in the next step, but the best thing you can do in molding leather is to sort of overshape it when you first start putting the shapes in there, because in subsequent steps you may lose some of that shape, and it's a lot easier to flatten something out or kind of relax the shape a little bit than to try to put more shaping in when you're farther along in the process. So I find that it's easier just to go with more shaping to start, but that does mean that it can look a little bit scrunched up and funny at first. So don't worry if it does. I promise it'll look better. Make sure as you're doing this that don't just bend it like this where you're sort of going along a straight line. Try to remember that you're sort of trying to follow the shape of the leaf. That's why I find that once you've actually gotten the curve started, it can be easier to sort of put it down on your surface, because then you've got both hands to play with it. And as you're doing this, because your fingers may leave little wavery marks along the edges, that is fine. That is actually great because a lot of poinsettias do have a bit of a kind of a wavy edge. So not only should you not worry about that, but you should actually embrace it because it's going to give it a lot more dimension.
We're at
Do you
the
need-
30-minute mark, just to
Yep.
let you know.
Yep. Thank you. So I'm going to do that with all of these. And it can feel kind of awkward at first, as with, I think, most new things. But just bending the leather and folding it and shaping it can feel a little weird at first, but it, as with everything, you do get used to it. And as you're doing this, if your leather feels like it doesn't want to shape, you may want to give it a little more moisture. At this point, if you need to spray it again, spray the back side, the rough side. It's just, it'll work a little better if you do that. So when writing out the tool list for this, one of the things that I put in was something like this, like a jar lid of about this size. You could also use the top of a cup or something. They're just handy for shaping some of the poinsettia pieces. The bottom piece you don't really need it for, but I am going to show you how it works on the other piece before we move to the next step. So like I've said a couple times, but I'm not going to be able to show you this same thing on every piece because that would take us for the rest of the whole hour, probably. But what I'm doing on this one, the shaping like of these like this, is identical on all of them. So once you have them shaped and they look kind of like this, you want to very gently curve them under just a little bit. And you'll see that that will open up and flatten out the leaf a little bit. And that's part of why I told you to sort of overdo it before, because then it sort of ends in a, I guess it's perfect spot. Now with the bottom piece, we actually want it to be fairly flat. So you can just lay it down, put it aside to dry. With the smaller pieces, and at this point, these ones are actually dry, but I'm gonna use them to represent the others just to show you. With the smaller pieces, the two middle-sized ones, one of them you can just kind of lay flat on your other piece if you want. They could even dry like that, or just lay flat on your table to dry. The other one, and it doesn't matter which, you just decide kind of which one's going to be which. It can help to shape it if you lay it into the lid or the top of your cup or whatever you're using, because you can just gently press it in there, not necessarily all the way to the table, but just a little bit, and curve these under. And that will make the petals lift a little more, and it will maintain that shaping when it dries, especially if you leave it in there. And then with the top piece, the smallest one, you want to do that even more. So for this one, you could put your finger in and actually press it all the way to the bottom and then curve down and sort of spread out the petals. And then to dry, you can just stick them both in here together, which is what I did. That way we've got two flatter pieces, one that's a little bit more dimensional, and then one that's even more so just because it's smaller. And that will give our whole poinsettia a little bit more dimension, as opposed to having all the pieces flat. You can see when they stack up, it helps to give it some height. So if you're working along, this is probably where I work ahead of you, just because one reality of leather work is there's a lot of drying involved. You really do want your pieces to be completely dry before coloring them, if possible. And depending on your climate, it may be overnight. You can also use a hairdryer. I've done it often. But you do want to make sure that they don't feel cool, they don't feel wet at all, or damp, just because you don't want to lose any of the shaping when you're coloring it. So here's my palette, because I prefer to use these because I hate washing out palettes. But the colors that I'm using to color this is So basically I've got a red and a green. Obviously. So the largest piece, the back piece, is the green one, and the other three are red. This one, I actually used a slightly different color. It was they're all in Angelus paint, which is a paint that you can get from Michael's that is specifically made for leather. It's an acrylic. You could use another acrylic, absolutely too, but Angelus paint is pretty great. So I would say if you have it, I would use it. For this one, I actually used it's a more kind of lipstick red. It's a chili red. And after doing that, I kind of thought about it, and the red that I showed, or I put in the tool or the material list, is a slightly deeper scarlet kind of a red, and I think it's actually called scarlet red. Angelus is also nice because you can buy them in these little tubs. I'm just going to shake this up. So again, I'm only going to show you the coloring on one of the petals because the process is the same for all. And well, we still have to assemble them. That's the most fun part. So we don't want to spend all of our time doing this. Angelus paint is pretty thin. It's like we'd call a high flow acrylic, kind of a thinner texture. Like it can kind of drip across here. And it's like that for a reason. It's meant to be like that. It helps it to sort of spread over the leather and really have good coverage. I've got some paper towels too. And since we are coloring kind of these small things you're holding in your hand, if you aren't like me and you actually care if your hands are covered in bits of paint, you might want to wear gloves for this, although it is acrylic, so it will wash off. For my first coat, you don't have to do this, but for my first one, I kind of like to add just a couple drops of water to my paint, just to thin it out even more. It just makes it a little easier to get that first coat on, but it's not a hard and fast rule. So this kind of paint goes on very smoothly. It's why it's sort of a thin paint. But it's designed to have really good coverage, even though it's thin. Like you can see, even with the water in there, it's very, it covers really well. I found with this leather and with these colors, I generally only needed maybe 2 coats. So I put 1 coat on with it slightly thinned out, and then just went over with 1 more thin coat with it not thinned out at all. Or you could just do it not thinned out both times too. One thing, if you're painting leather for the first time, that you should keep in mind is that, as we saw before, the leather does get darker when it's wet. And particularly with your first coat, if you're thinning it out, you're going to be able to see through the paint a bit, which can sometimes make it look blotchy, because what you're actually seeing is certain bits of the leather are a little bit more, they're darkening more because of the moisture. So if you're seeing that and it's bothering you, don't worry. It will go away as soon as that leather, oh no, oh well, second coat, done. It will go away when that leather dries. So it's just something that can be annoying if you don't know what it is, because you wonder, I'm painting it on so carefully, how could it be blotchy? But that is why. So it really does even out. Just make sure you're getting it on there, nice and sort of thin and even. I also, with my first coat, if I've thinned it out, that's when I also like to try to catch the edges. And also if you decide to color the back sides with just the red color, it's a little easier if you do that with the paint thinned out slightly. It's just because the flesh side, the rough side of the leather tends to soak in the paint more. So it just covers more if you go, if your paint is just a little bit thinned out. But again, this paint is fairly thin as it is. It's designed to be, so it's not a huge deal. So you definitely will want to paint the back sides of your petals, particularly the back pieces, obviously, but even this little front one. just because you might not think you'd be able to see it when they're all put together, but this color is a lot lighter than that color. So it could show. If you want, to do something a little glitzier, what I did on mine is I did a little bit of red to catch the edges of this, but then I did metallic gold. I got it all over the thing, but it's Liquitex gold that I got from Michael's too. And I kind of like having that gold background because it just shines a little bit and it looks really nice on the back of the, there you go, on the back of this one. I only did it on the green, but I just think it looks really nice on the ornament. And of course, if you used maybe not gold beads, you could get a different metallic. And you could also even paint this in the color and then brush the gold on over it on the back too, and that will look good. So you want to paint all your pieces. Don't worry about losing the shaping on them as you're painting them. I mean, it is getting them a little bit damp, but as long as you're handling them pretty gently, not squishing it, not bending it too much, it will keep its shape just fine. With the green, what I'm using is, I got gold on this one too, you can see, it's the color dark green. And I don't have time to show you the green, unfortunately. Painting it is exactly like painting on the red. You may find you need one more coat of the green just because I just found that it seemed like the underlying leather color just showed a little bit more through there. But I think probably a lot of you have painted things before, so that will not be a surprise to you. And you just kind of keep putting on thin coats until you like how it looks. The other thing about the leather being damp, other than potentially looking a little blotchy, is that you may find that your first coat of paint, particularly if you have diluted it, might look a little dark or a little bit dull, brown, not as vivid a color as you expect. And that is also just because the damp leather color is coming through. Sorry about that. So that's another thing that will correct itself as the leather dries. So don't worry. You'll find that as everything really dries underneath, the color will brighten up more than you would expect. So, no, I lost my other piece. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I've got my pieces. They're painted. They're dry. I know it's hard to wait sometimes, but it really is easier if it's fully dry, the paint, before you move on to the next step. And it's better for the pieces too, because even with a little bit of moisture in there, they're more likely to get kind of lose some of the shaping that you put in if you are manhandling them too much while they are not dry. So once they are dry, we've got basically the last step, which is...
I have a question here. Someone's wanting to know about the paint. Would you ever undercoat with white before using the paint to help, I guess, cover the... With
this paint and this leather, which is pretty light colored, I wouldn't, because I didn't find that the color of the leather really caused the color of the paint to be at all dark. But if you're trying to get like a really vivid color, or if you're working with leather that is a little bit darker, then it's definitely something you can do. Absolutely. And sometimes when you're working with leather, since it's not a white canvas, it's a tan or brownish, and some leather is much darker. It is always something to consider undercoating with white if you're not getting a color as bright as you want it. So that's a really good question.
Is there any way to stiff real leather? I'm not sure exactly what that means.
To stiffen it more than it already is. This leather dries pretty stiff. It's already fairly stiff when even out of the package, probably noticed. And once it is dampened and formed and manipulated and everything, and it dries again, it will actually be even stiffer. But if it's still too floppy, if you're just having an issue, it's not keeping its shape. If you have an acrylic finish, there's a lot of them made for leather, but you could also use one made for paint, like an acrylic like protective finish. If you find that before you paint the backs of your pieces, because you'll need to do this before you paint them, that your pieces are floppier than you'd like, put a generous amount of that acrylic finish onto the flesh side, the back side of the leather. It will soak it in, and that is what you want. When it dries, it will be much stiffer. It'll still have give, but it will stiffen it up quite a bit. But this thickness of leather tends to be pretty stiff anyway. So I have, just so you know, we're not using it for a second, but I have plugged in my hot glue gun because we are going to be using hot glue, just because I know that it takes a second to heat up. So it's happening off camera. All right. So in order to get from these pieces to this, we need to do three things. One of them is to add the ribbon. One of them is to add the center with the beads. And the last is to glue everything together. You can add the ribbon at the end, but I find it a little bit easier to do it now because it's just, you're not trying to sort of bend back this piece. It's a little bit more accessible. So you want to look at your bottom piece and kind of figure out how you think it looks the best or the most symmetrical, or I think that looks good. Let it hang like that. So I need to put my hole here. I do think, and I apologize, I think that I forgot to put this on the material list for the class, but one of these leather punches, it's ArtMinds brand through Michaels, is very handy for making a hole. And you can use that to punch a hole like I did for this one. It's got different sizes. But if you do not have a leather punch like this, the other thing that you can do is with your blade, your X-Acto knife, start about, I would say about ½ inch down from the tip of the leaf, right on your center line here, and cut a little slit all the way through that is basically just slightly wider than your ribbon. In this case, my ribbon is fairly wide, so I want to make sure it's big enough. And then if you've got your stylus or anything else handy, just kind of stick that through to sort of open the slit up. I've cut, this is a 3/8 inch sparkly gold ribbon because I'm using sparkly gold beads. I want to use the ribbon that kind of goes with it. So I've cut about 11 inches of it. It might be more than I need, but that's okay. If you cut it at an angle, it's easier to get through. And if you have trouble getting it through the slit, you can open it up a little more, or even if you have a like a tapestry needle or something that you could thread the ribbon onto. And the reason that the hole is a little bit far down on the leaf as opposed to right up at the tip is it's both so that it doesn't show as much. And I also did some experimenting and I found that it hung straighter, like flatter this way. So I'm just doing kind of a standard little loop. But I just think it's sometimes a little easier to do that first. And the slit's kind of nice because you actually, I think, see it less than you do the hole. So next, before we can glue this together, which honestly is my favorite part because that's where you go from nothing to pretty much done, is we want to make the little beaded center. I'm going to use wire. This is a 22 gauge. It's artistic wire. Sorry, it's all torn up. And it's kind of a gold finish, brass finish to match my beads. It's not really going to show much, but you know, whatever shows, I'd prefer it match. So I'm going to cut like 6-ish inches. It doesn't need to be exact. I just wanted to make sure that it's plenty because it's easier to work with if you have a longer thing. So the beads I'm using are, it's Bead Landing brand. It's one of these ones that comes on a sort of multi-strand pack, which is cool. They're glass beads, but they're really sparkly and gold. And they come in different sizes, which I really like because you could do it differently. You could combine some sizes, do more beads in the smaller size. I mean, anything. I'm using, I believe these are the 6mm. It's the second from the biggest size on this strand. And I am using 6 of them. So actually I have put 6 of them on here. Let me move this away. So what I want to do first is just separate one of them, because what I'm basically doing is I want to create a little circle essentially of 5 of the beads and then have one that is kind of popped above it to give it a little bit of more dimension. And the reason I'm putting it together with wire first instead of just gluing the beads in is that I think that it's a lot less likely you're going to see the hot glue or that your beads are going to shift while you're trying to glue them in. And this just kind of holds it together a little bit better. So I'm taking one end of the wire. I want to give myself about an inch maybe. And I'm just bending it at about a 90-degree angle. I will say I am not a wire wrapper or anything like that. I'm sure if you're someone who's very experienced with this, you probably have like a cooler, tricky way to do this, but it works. So I've slid one bead down to right kind of before this bend that I did. And I want that to be my top bead. So then I just want to kind of swirl around it, these ones. I'm trying to keep the beads as close together as they can be, just so it's not showing a ton of the wire. And because of the size of the beads, there we go, to make them sort of match up together or fit more tightly together, it will automatically kind of push this bead up. So it sort of just does that. And I want, there you go, push that wire down.
We're down to about 7 minutes.
Yep, I am almost done with this, and then the gluing, and then it's over. Thank you. I'll warn you guys, I do a lot of online classes, and I do tend to go over time, but I'm not going to today. It's not going to happen. So once you've gone all the way around, just twist these 2 ends under. Don't worry, as long as it's staying together, we're going to hot glue it in a second, so it's not, the wire is really just to keep everything in place. But I think for anyone who's like really good with wire out there, they're probably thinking, oh man, there is a better way. And I'm sure you're right. But for this, it looks just fine. So you just want to make sure that your little thing, you've got your sort of little circle and your one little bead up top. All right, and now my favorite part, the assembly. I think a lot of different things, you spend so much time on the pieces that it feels like you're so far from being done, and then all of a sudden you do that final step and you're just done. And that's, I think, my favorite part of everything. So I've got my hot glue gun. All right. Are you working, hot glue gun? There we go. So I like to start from the bottom. This is probably pretty self-explanatory, but I just need to look real quick and see which one of these middle-sized ones I think is flatter that was kind of meant to go here. I'm just going to pick this one. So on the bottom, you can be pretty generous. Stick another glue sticking with your glue because it's really not going to show. As we get up to the upper pieces, you have to be a little more careful. So you want to orient this so it's centered, but the petals or the leaves are sort of offset with the piece under it. And then, well, I'm sure you've all used hot glue. Hold it for a second to make sure it has a chance to stick. You can go to the next one. You could either put it on the bottom of your next piece or on the top of the last piece, if that makes sense. I'm just doing this so that I don't risk it dripping as I move the other piece. You can do it, glue gun. All right. Nice thing with leather is you don't have to worry about the heat of the glue. It's not like with silk flowers or anything where you have to worry about burning it. All right, hold that one down for a second. Okay, And then with the top piece, the smallest, I would suggest, because this is the one where if any glue is showing that shouldn't be, it's going to be this. I would suggest putting the glue actually on the back of this piece, because then you don't risk putting way too much. Fortunately, the little beaded center also would help to hide that if, you know, if any shows. Or just a little bit of paint. I'll be honest, I've definitely painted over some exposed hot glue. All right, hold that down for a second. And then for this, I want to be pretty generous because there is a bit of a cavity inside here because of that top bead. So I do want to make sure there's enough glue that it really holds that down within reason. That's why hot glue is good for this, because that way we can use it for all the steps and not have to switch. There you go. And just make sure that that's gotten down there. Hopefully. And there it is. All done. The other nice thing about the gold is that you could write your name or the date or, you know, to somebody. It's a little easier to write on that bright color. So
That's beautiful, Annie. You've got a ton of little text in the chat that says how detailed your instruction was. So that's great.
and here it is.
Beautiful.
Well, and if you made a bunch of these, you could make a wreath, put them on a, I don't know, picture frame or something. You can make them in smaller sizes. I've done these kind of things in quite a few, but you can see a little bit of the color difference between the two. It's not huge, but I think poinsettias come in different colors anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Yes. There's actually white poinsettias, so that might be interesting for the person that asked about painting in white. It might be interesting to do a white one.
Ones would be really pretty too. I like the
Yes.
I'll have to try one of those next. Well,
I was thinking a smaller one would make a nice pin or brooch.
I have made smaller ones. You might need to use thinner leather, but you could do it. Yeah, leather's nice for pins because it's very sturdy, and it's not brittle. So if it gets caught on your coat or something, it's not gonna break off. It's got some flex to it. But I hope that some of you will make one of these, and I hope that you will tag Michael's under Make It With Michael's or Michael's classes. And I hope that you'll tag me too under Libertini Arts, because I would love to see it. And
Thank you, everybody. Fantastic class, Annie. And we hope to see more leather work from you.
Yeah, definitely. That would be
Bye.
great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.